Welcome and thank you for attending Team Rio's final presentation of our Biomed IT domain project. During this presentation, we will be covering basic background information about the project, what we produced as a team for the project, if the project was a success, an assessment of project management tools, estimated versus actual hours, what went wrong and what went right, lessons learned, project manager information, team dynamics, and sponsors' final assessment.
Team Rio worked with the Biomedical Engineering Department of the Southern Nevada VA Health System to develop a biomedical domain and new asset tracking database. Team Rio selected this project because we felt that the need was greatest, and it allowed Team Rio the honor of providing a proof of concept that would improve the quality of care provided to military veterans throughout Southern Nevada. The end state was to provide a single source for IT-related problem resolution and to improve on the existing access management system that is 20 plus years old. Working with the project sponsor, Brendan Kikuyu, it was determined that the Biomed domain was their number one priority for the project due to the issues routinely experienced when assisting end users. The current VA domain consolidates clinical and administrative user accounts and computer accounts into a single domain. This domain is owned and managed by VA IT staff. However, VA IT staff are not allowed to work on devices that affect patient care. This is the sole responsibility of the biomedical staff. The basic rule is if it touches a patient or patient data, then VA IT is not authorized to work on it. This seems like a simple concept. However, the VA's decision to consolidate clinical and administrative functions into a single domain without clearly defining responsibilities causes a lot of confusion when a user reports a computer issue. A typical trouble call scenario that plays out dozens of times a day is this. A nurse or doctor calls the IT help desk to report a problem with their computer. The IT staff generates a ticket and places it in their queue. Once the IT staff makes an assumption that the computer touches patient data, they will tell the user to call Biomed. The user then calls Biomed and again explains the problem, only to be told by Biomed staff that it's an IT-related issue and to call IT. The frustrated user now gets stuck in a pointing finger loop between IT and Biomed. Eventually, a meeting between IT and Biomed takes place where they finally decide which department is responsible to fix the issue. Typically, this ends up being the Biomed staff, even though they don't have any elevated privileges to fix domain assets. Finally, after a far too long process, the originally reported problem is resolved. To provide context, to add a computer to the VA domain takes approximately 21 days. The domain that Team Rio developed will eliminate the finger pointing and give nurses and doctors a single spot to report all computer-related problems.
The Biomed IT domain project only faced a couple ethical concerns. First, when it came to the fact that the Southern Nevada VA Healthcare System Biomed Department directly handles the biomed equipment that is used in monitoring and in life and death situations. As you can imagine, this can be a hot topic when it comes to ethics as far as, what's the proper handling of the situation, care, monitoring, all those types of things. And as you can imagine, timely response to issues is imperative. This was part of the problem that was facing the biomed department is all the red tape and things they were dealing with, lack of communication. They're having issues with timely responses. All these things our ethical considerations when it comes into patient care and human lives hang in the balance. Um, and all the health decisions that were made by the doctors that take care of these patients, all those decisions are based on the data they're receiving from the equipment. So they're heavily relying on all this equipment to be accurate and to be present so they can be used properly in the situation. And as you can imagine, the loss of such equipment or assets can result in higher costs for the patients because it rolls down since there's more expenses. Then sometimes that expense gets passed on to the patients in some hospitals. I don't know if that's the case in this hospital per se, but that is also another ethical concern that faces this type of a project. The team produced a prototype example of the Biomed IT department project that was mainly comprised of 3 parts: the domain, the security, and the database. We'll be getting into this a little bit further in detail into each of these sections in the following slides.
The Biomed domain was very straightforward. They wanted Windows Server 2016 as the server operating system and Windows 10 on all desktops and laptops. All production environment software would be provided via the Veteran Affairs Microsoft Volume Licensing Program. However, since the software was not authorized to be used on non-VA computers, Team Rio used evaluation copies downloaded from the Microsoft website. The sponsor's end state was a one-stop shop for all user, computer, and application support, along with increased uptime for medical devices. It is important to note that none of the current Biomed staff have any Microsoft certifications. Many of them have NetPlus, and one has earned the SecPlus certification. Team Rio did not want to overwhelm the Biomed staff, so the domain was kept very basic while still meeting the requirements of the sponsor. Initially interviewed the sponsor, we learned that none of the Biomed IT staff have Microsoft certifications. Therefore, when we built the domain, we only built it with Active Directory and DNS installed. We didn't add a bunch of roles and features because we didn't want to overwhelm the staff, especially when they don't have the certifications and training at this time to manage those different features and services. Therefore, like I said, Active Directory is installed along with DNS, and we have 2 domain controllers, DC01 and DC02. I'm currently logged into DC01, and we set up the OU structure, organizational unit structure, to mimic the setup of the hospital. In this case, we have 3 different departments, 1 West, 6 East, and 6 West. Underneath each one of these departments, we have sub-OUs for computers and users. This allows us to create group policies and kind of make it more granular, applying group policies to 1 West that maybe don't apply to 6 East. Also, by doing this, if we wanted to, we could also delegate control to certain levels to power users within those departments, so that way the individual departments can kind of handle routine trouble tickets, password resets, account unlocks without calling the IT staff. Over here we have a Windows 10 client, and just to show that we can log in, we will just log in as a test user, in this case 1 West user. While that's logging in, I'm going to go ahead and create a new user so that way we can use it as a test. So this is a brand new user, so we can show that how quickly we can create user accounts. So I'm just going to create a quick user here. This is the name off the top of my head. Give it a default username, which in the VA standard is usually first name dot last name. Give it a default password. And in this case, I'm going to turn off the change password and next login. So now we have this new user. We literally just created it. And while over here in client 1, I'm going to go ahead and log off of OneWest test user. And while that's logging out, one of the other issues that was reported by the Biomed IT staff is it takes up to 3 weeks to add a computer to the domain. So with this new Biomed domain, we can see how quickly we can add computer accounts to the domain. Remember, on the VA right now, it currently takes 3 weeks. So let's see how fast we can get this computer added. Going to go over here to computers, property, change it. This is PC01, change settings, change. I'm going to add it to the biomed.va.gov. So right now it's reaching out. It's asking for an administrator account. And now it's connecting to the domain controller and requesting permission to join the domain. Now remember, this was a 3-week process under the VA right now. So we'll see how fast we can make this happen on our Biomed domain and see how much time we can save by having this domain feature. Again, these are VMs running on a machine, so it's going to take a few seconds. But as you can see, now it's been added to the domain. But again, on the VA, that took 3 weeks. As you can see, we just did it in less than 2 minutes. Now, while client 2 is rebooting, I'm going to go back here to client 1. We're going to switch users. We're going to log in as that test user that we literally just created. So as you can see, this user is logging in. This process alone on the VA network takes about 2 weeks. So we have taken a 2 and 3 week process in less than a 5-minute video, showed you how we can take care of both of these features, adding a user and adding a computer to the domain in less than 5 minutes. Currently, that's a 2 to 3 week process on the VA. So this Biomed IT domain is going to greatly impact not only the users, not only the Biomed staff, but the veterans who are getting the services at the VA. They'll have a better, more reliable network and be able to get service a lot faster because now their computers and users will be taken care of a lot faster.
For the purpose of the pilot and due to time constraints, we just decided to focus on server security. We felt this will maximize the security implications and security benefits for the sponsor. Given that once we defined a secure base build server image, that image can then be used by the sponsor to replicate across their environment. In the next following slides, we'll demo some of those key security components on the server that we implemented, that being the CIS benchmark, encryption, followed by patching. In hardening the Windows Server is to apply the CIS benchmarks. This was done by using a preset image from the Amazon Marketplace for this pilot project. We used a CIS hardened image and launched it. But to validate that the server is actually hardened to the CIS standards, we're able to use a tool called SecEdit. With this, you can build a list of configuration checks that can be analyzed against the server configuration to validate that the CIS hardening steps have truly been set. In doing so, we just fire up SecEdit. There's a database already with pre-assigned configuration checks, and we simply analyze the computer. This is where it will post the log output. Hit OK. And the configurations have been analyzed. So we can jump into this first one in a password policy. We can see that the database settings that it's checking for are set here, and here's the computer settings. And as you can see, it puts this nice green checkbox there to see that we've passed those settings, and we can walk through the various subchecks and see that once again the checks have been validated against the benchmark, and that confirms that the CAS benchmark settings have been applied to the will show how encryption and validate that encryption is enabled using BitLocker on the server. If BitLocker is installed, you'll be able to find it, um, find the application, and it's the Manage BitLocker application. Once we go there, you can see the drives that are available for BitLocker. Here we see that BitLocker is off on the primary drive. However, on the secondary drive, BitLocker is on, and its indicator is here that it's obviously on and the lock is on next to it. One of the reasons that we didn't encrypt the primary drive is because this is a virtual instance in the cloud. Upon boot, you would need to put a password in, and unfortunately, that's not available to me as an administrator when it boots. So just for the purpose of this pilot, we used BitLocker to encrypt on the secondary drive instead of the primary. Validate that the Windows Auto Update is configured to install automatically. So from the PowerShell, we'll run sconfig. And here, number 5, we can see Windows Update setting is set to automatic. And so once this is configured, it will check daily for patches and then dynamically install them.
For the database portion of what we produced as part of the project, we prototyped the database in Microsoft Access 365, and we hosted that on a Windows Server 2016 server. The database was split into a front and back end portion, where the front end is basically the user interface program, where the user interacts with the database, and the back end is where the data is actually stored. This allows for multi-user support, so multiple users can use the database at once. The back end would be stored on the server, and the front end of the database would be hosted on each individual workstation of the domain. And then we're going to go ahead and look at a demo next. The asset tracking database demo is part of the Biomed IT project. So here we are logged into a virtual Windows machine hosted on the Amazon Oz service. Go ahead and double click on the shortcut for the database on the desktop there, and as you see, it loads to a login screen. Depending on your permissions, you'll get access to different options. We're going to go ahead and first log in as the professor here. Just some test accounts we set up. So as you can see here, we get a list of all the assets that are currently checked out. If you want to see checked in and out, you can go ahead and check that. There's none that we have checked in. You can click and look at the current users of the database. You can add new assets. As you can see here, you fill out all these details on each asset. It's checked out to, what location, as you can see here. Needs dynamically update. Your information is added. You can print that detailed screen. You can email this list in a variety of formats. But as you see here, there's no way to edit login user logins, just the user contacts as far as who's checking stuff in and out, but not who can log in and out of the database. And there's also no way to run reports and see information about the data in the database. So if we go ahead and log back out, we log in as an administrator. You can see now there's more options. Edit user login. That'll open a list of user logins to add, and there's also an option to select reports. All assets, asset details, assets by categories, and we can go ahead and look at one of these, contact book by last name. We can go ahead and look at assets by category. They're all vitals. Assets by location. They're all at the main location. See, we went here and we changed this. And then ran this by location. You can see now it's divvied up by each location. So as you can see, there's a variety of reports. They can generate useful information and keep track of what's going on as far as the assets go. You can see down here at the bottom, it gives you a status on who's logged in. And then when you log out, it tells you. So, yep, this is the fruition of our efforts at the end of Sprint 4 for the Biomed IT Asset Tracking Database prototype built in Microsoft Access. Thank you, and thank you for watching our demo. As outlined in the project charter that we originally came up for the Biomed IT domain project in the A class, or class 1 of this capstone project, the main project success criteria was defined as the team delivering value to the sponsor week after week based on a prioritized backlog or series of features that the sponsor wanted to see as part of the project. At the end of Class A / during the beginning of Class B, Team Row came up with that prioritized backlog, and we implemented it during the implementation phase of the project during the B class by both all the team members and the sponsor. This project was a success based on that success criteria, and the sponsor plans on implementing the project moving forward. Many project management tools were used throughout this project. The few listed here were the most useful to our team. The business case was a good initial document that outlined what the project was going to be all about. And the project charter gave a little more detail. The milestone report provided a nice breakdown of when the major goals we should be hitting at certain times during the project. The Gantt chart was a further breakdown that really laid out the timeline of every single piece of the project, and that was super useful to see. The product backlog, I think, in our project was probably the most useful project management tool or important piece, since it drove the implementation phase and the Scrum process, what we were working towards. The scope management was definitely needed, since it outlined what we were going to be doing or how far we were going to take the project. And then the work breakdown structure was good to see a breakdown of each step of the work during the execution phase.
For the estimated versus actual hours, our team chose to go with the Agile framework and use story points to track our actual capacity. In the beginning, we allocated 50 story points per week per Scrum member with a 4-week project timeline. 4 members, that total came to 200 story points per week, or 800 total projected story points for the project. In actuality, we were able to find some time savers by specifically in security, finding pre-configured deployments around the CIS benchmark rather than have to manually deploy those configurations. We were able to launch one right from the AWS marketplace, which saved us considerable time. And because of that gain in additional capacity, we were able to swarm around other items that we had under estimated time and work for. So really the difference is because we use the Agile framework, it allowed for the team flexibility to adapt on the ground as we were able to find places where we would gain some capacity and find areas where we needed additional capacity, and we're able to shift that around in order to take full advantage of the Agile framework and maximize our time.
During the project, there were many things that went right. The team was able to work together and communicate efficiently through WebEx meetings and Slack chat. The project owner did a great job in communicating with the sponsor to identify the needs of the project. The project manager successfully led each meeting by outlining what type of work was needed to be done each week. The Scrum Master had experience in Agile and was able to create a product backlog to keep the team on track, and also create a chart to keep track of the progress. Each Scrum team member was able to complete the task in the product backlog on time. Throughout the project, there was not much that went wrong. The team was able to communicate effectively and complete the task on time each week. The project manager was able to keep the team on track by updating the team each week, what needed to be done, and how the project was going. The project owner was able to successfully create the WebEx meetings each week and make sure the recording was available if anyone needed to review it. The product backlog was clearly defined, and every team member was able to stay on track with the task each week.
For the lessons learned for the project, we found that we need to establish effective and efficient communications and collaboration tools early on. We jumped between two different chat programs where I think that lost us a little bit of time and capability. Ideally, going forward, we have those lessons learned and can implement a solid technology list that we will leverage for our collaboration tools. We also need to ensure that team members are fully committed. We had an extra team member. The communication wasn't very good, and so we spent a lot of time thinking that action items were being worked on, but in fact weren't, and then the team had to rush in at the last minute and make up those differences. We also need to provide more time up front for research. In kicking off the pilot, I think some assumptions were made, but further research proved that those assumptions were not necessarily incorrect, but maybe lacking additional depth of detail, which then didn't allow us to plan accordingly. And we had to use the Agile method to basically pivot and adapt to accommodate that lack of research. And then lastly is just to ensure we account for class overhead during week one of each course. The first week of each course, it's a little slow to kick off, and we're trying to understand what are our class commitments and understanding, and so that eats into some of the time for our project. So just accommodating that and accounting for that in our project timeline would be helpful.
The project manager of our team was selected by volunteer. He has received positive feedback throughout the timeline of the project and leading the team. Going forward, he is interested in incorporating project management into his career and pursuing certifications such as the CompTIA Project Plus, P2P Foundation, PMP, and P2P Practitioner to help incorporate that in his career going forward.
At this point in our degree process, all Team Rio members had participated in numerous National University group projects. During our capstone adventure, all Team Rio members commented how this group was one of the best. It was no fluke that communication was the cornerstone of our team's success. During our capstone, we used software such as Google Drive, Google Hangouts, Cisco WebEx, and Slack to share and collaborate. We conducted WebEx sessions every Monday and Thursday throughout the series of capstone courses. The Monday sessions set the tone for the week and generated team member assignments, while the Thursday sessions were used to update each other on our individual progress. We began using Slack during 490B once we realized that Google Hangouts was not giving team members the real-time updates we needed to be successful. Changing a communication process in the middle of a project can be hard for some teams, but not Team Rio. We adapted to a new communication tool, just like we adapted to losing a team member at the end of 490A. All Team Rio members maintain a high level of personal accountability to ensure their tasks were completed while also lending a hand to fellow team members when needed. Finally, Team Rio made all decisions by consensus. Our project manager really focused on hearing everyone's perspective and incorporating everyone's ideas. Team Rio started as a bunch of individuals, but ended as a single group of friends. During Team Rio's final meeting with the project sponsor, there was admiration expressed on both sides. Team Rio was happy to have a responsive and supportive sponsor, and the sponsor was pleased with the final products and that we met his vision. The sponsor stated that configuring the domain in a sandbox environment and using the database on AWS allowed my staff to see what capabilities work for us and which ones do not. We are now more confident in the systems and ready to take this proof of concept into production.